My name is Randall Eggert. This class is Grammar and Stylistics. It's about writing clearly.
Emphasis. In this video, we're going to be going over how to create emphasis in writing, how to get your readers to focus on particular words or phrases in your sentences. The most obvious means would be with typographic emphasis. So the first question is, what typographic methods are there to draw readers' attention to certain words or ideas? There's the exclamation point, italics, bold, all caps, quotation marks. The last of these is one that really bugs me, partly because of something that happened when I was in my early 20s. I was working at a restaurant as a salad cook. And one day I went to punch in. We had one of those mechanical clocks to punch in with, and there was a new note there that said, if you forget to punch out, you must talk to Steve. Now, to be charitable, and I don't have a whole lot of reason to be charitable to Steve because I couldn't stand the guy, but anyways, to be charitable to Steve, I think that he was trying to emphasize the word forget with those quotation marks. But of course, that's not the way it came across. How it came across was that they were like scare quotes, where the word was being used ironically, as though he were accusing us of intentionally not clocking out so that we could doctor our hours, which honestly, none of us would have done. But the truth is, I don't like any of these methods. I don't like the exclamation point. I don't like all caps, both of those, because it's like shouting at your readers. And as a reader, I don't want to be shouted at. Italics, I don't like, because in linguistics, we use italics for a different reason. In linguistics, we use italics to indicate that we're not using a word, we're mentioning it. We're talking about a word. About the only one that I can see using is bold, but in academic writing, except in textbooks where the bold has a specific purpose, usually to indicate that this is a key word that will be in the index or in the glossary, we just don't use that. And the truth is that these are really just a blunt force method of getting your readers to pay more attention to a particular word. There are more subtle methods, and these more subtle methods are applied by skilled writers. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, is these subtle methods for emphasis. Careful word choice is one method where you just use words that are unusual. The thing about this one is it does work, but you got to use it sparingly. You got to be careful with it, because it also may just come across that you are trying to show off. And if readers feel that you're just trying to impress them with your vocabulary, the opposite's going to happen. They're going to think that you are doing tricks for them because you're self-conscious about your own ideas. So if you do this, do it rarely, and only do it when the word is actually apt. If you use the wrong word, which is called a malapropism, that's even worse, because then you're just going to annoy everybody. Another method, and this is one I encourage, is to use connectors, like however, therefore, moreover. These guide readers in terms of how they should be reading your sentences, how the sentences are connected to each other, but they also create emphasis. When I see the word however in writing, as a reader, my mind suddenly wakes up and I say, okay, something important is about to come because this is unusual. Or therefore, I realize that the writer is about to come to a conclusion. Again, though, be sure that you're using this correctly. What really bugs me as a professor is when I get writing from students where they're trying to force this on their writing, where they just throw in howevers or therefores or anything like that without cause, without purpose. It really bothers me as a reader when I see a therefore, but I don't see a conclusion coming afterward. Or if I read a however and it's not surprising what comes after. So again, it's got to be apt. Another subtle method of emphasis is parallelism. This is very effective. Parallel content, parallel form. Martin Luther King Jr. was an expert at this. So I encourage you to go and read his writing. Letter from Birmingham Jail, I think, is just a brilliant piece. And he uses parallelism so well in his writing and in his speeches. So I also encourage you to go on YouTube and look up some of his speeches because they are incredible. So let me give you an example, though, of how this idea of parallel content, parallel form works. So the sentence reads, although John F. Kennedy was our youngest elected president, Theodore Roosevelt was actually younger when he became president. Now, it's a clumsy sentence. And part of the clumsiness is because there's no parallelism. Clearly, we're contrasting two things, but the form is different. And when I present this to students in person, I find that most of them are kind of baffled by this. And many of them say, well, how could that be? So let me give you a revised version of it. Although John F. Kennedy was our youngest elected president, Theodore Roosevelt was our youngest president. When I phrase it like this, the bells start going off for the audience. The solution is quite simple, that Theodore Roosevelt was the vice president, the president died, and Theodore Roosevelt became president. So he wasn't young, he was actually younger than John F. Kennedy when he became president, but he wasn't elected when he was younger. He then went on and won an election when the term came up. Another example of parallelism. This class is about writing clearly, writing concisely, writing elegantly, and grammar. I mean, it's almost laughable how just clunky that sentence ends. And we can revise this one quite easily. This class is about writing clearly, concisely, elegantly, and grammatically. Just a nicer flow to this, and it's also less wordy, because one of the things that comes with parallelism is the ability to leave off repeated words. Continuing on with the subtle methods of emphasis, we're going to focus on the one I think is most important, which is the stress position or end weight. So I want to think about these two sentences, which have the same information in them, but how that information is conveyed is different. So the first one reads, right now the economy is poor, but it is improving. The second one reads, the economy is improving, but right now it is poor. I want you to notice that in those two sentences, my intonation falls on that last word. So in the first one, it falls on improving. In the second one, it falls on poor. That's what we call end weight. It's just a natural part of our language, is that when we come to the end of a sentence, we put a little bit more weight on that last word. We do the same thing in our heads when we come to a period. The word right before the period gets more weight. We can use that. So, Joseph Williams has a diagram for this. We've seen this before when we talked about cohesion. In the topic position, which is the first part of the sentence, we want old, short, and simple information. That's what we can control, is what we put in the beginning of the sentence. We don't want new stuff in there. We don't want long stuff in there. We don't want difficult stuff in there. That's all for the stress position. We save the hard stuff for last. The new stuff, the long stuff, the complex stuff. Let me give you an example of how we can use that principle. So I'm going to read you the original, and it's awful. Mucosal and vascular permeability altered by a toxin elaborated by the vibrio is a current hypothesis to explain this kind of severe condition. Changes in small capillaries located near the basal surface of the epithelial cells and the appearance of numerous microvesicles in the cytoplasm of the mucosal cells is evidence in favor of this hypothesis. hydrodynamic transport of fluid into the interstitial tissue and then through the mucosa into the lumen of the gut is believed to depend on altered capillary permeability. I've read this sentence many times, or this paragraph rather, many times. It doesn't make sense to me. And the first time I read it, it gave me a headache. I didn't even know where to begin. Now I realize I'm not the intended audience for this. I'm not into medicine, biology, anatomy. I don't know the terminology, but I wouldn't even know where to start to figure out what I don't know. But if we rearrange this to get the old information to the front of the sentence and the new information to the end, the short information to the front, the long information to the end, the simple information to the front, the complex information to the end, we're going to make this a lot easier. I've broken this into the 3 sentences, and we'll go through each one. So the first one, mucosal and vascular permeability altered by a toxin elaborated by the vibrio is a current hypothesis to explain this kind of severe condition. Well, I notice that we have what is presumably old information at the end of this sentence. So we must understand that this is a paragraph from somewhere in the middle of a paper. It's not the first paragraph. And so a severe condition has already been introduced. So let's bring that to the front of the sentence. So instead of saying mucosal and vascular permeability altered by a toxin elaborated by the vibrio and make that our subject, let's make this kind of severe condition our subject. This kind of severe condition is explained by a current hypothesis. The vibrio elaborates a toxin which alters mucosal and vascular permeability. All right, now I'm still a little vague on what a vibrio is and what mucosal and vascular permeability is, but I feel like I could look those terms up and I'd understand what this sentence is about. Let's go on to the second sentence. Changes in small capillaries located near the basal surface of the epithelial cells and the appearance of numerous microvesicles in the cytoplasm of the mucosal cells is evidence in favor of this hypothesis. All right, now that first 2 lines practically is the subject. From changes to cells, that's the subject. That's terribly long, which is putting too much strain on a reader's short-term memory. They need something short in that position so that they can begin processing this into their long-term memory. And then I notice that we've got old information referring back to the hypothesis we just talked about in the previous sentence. So all we got to do is just rearrange that sentence. This hypothesis is supported by changes in small capillaries located near the basal surface of the epithelial cells, period. Now what I did here, the reason I put that period is so that we could have more than one stress position. Now we've got 2 stress positions. So then I go on to the next one referring to this hypothesis with it. It is also supported by the appearance of numerous microvesicles in the cytoplasm of mucosal cells. Still don't understand it, but I know what I don't understand. Now it would be a matter of looking up these terms and figuring out what they mean. All right, the final one. Hydrodynamics transport of fluid into the interstitial tissue and then through the mucosa into the lumen of the gut is believed to depend on altered capillary permeability. All right, again, we've got a fairly long subject from hydrodynamic transport all the way to the gut. That's our subject. Let's get that smaller. Now, what I notice is that we've got a passive verb, which means that if we depassivize it, we're going to need to introduce a new character. Well, who does the believing in a case like this? Presumably scientists or maybe researchers. I'm going to say researchers. Researchers believe that capillary permeability determines how fluid is hydrodynamically transported into the interstitial tissue and then through the mucosa into the lumen of the gut. So now, with those changes, I don't have to understand what the sentences mean to make them clearer. All I've got to do is rearrange it so that we get that new, complex, long information there at the end of the sentence, using that end weight for the hard stuff. And put the easy stuff at the beginning of the sentence. If we do that, our readers are going to thank us.